At 9:23 p.m., on September 17th, 1944, Private Second Class Tomas Navarro crouched behind a collapsed stone wall in the ruins of a bombed monastery overlooking the German command post, watching 14 Wehrmacht guards patrol the courtyard 180 yards below through the autumn mist. He carried no rifle, no grenades, no radio, only a canvas satchel containing 3 small glass vials, a straight razor, and a tattered copy of a German phrasebook. In 48 minutes, reinforcements from the 36th Infantry Division would begin their assault on the northern perimeter 3 miles across the valley. In the next 6 minutes, he would descend into that courtyard, walk past those guards, enter the inner chambers where General Major Klaus Steiner slept, and complete a mission that every officer in the Allied command had declared suicidal, proving that the most devastating weapons of war are not forged in factories, but brewed in the quiet desperation of men who learned to kill before they learned to fight. The vials clinked softly as Navarro adjusted the satchel. Inside each one, Aconitum napellus, wolfsbane, monkshood, the same poison his grandmother had warned him about in the hills above Albuquerque, the same purple flower that grew wild in the shadow country of northern New Mexico, where people still remembered the old ways, the ways everyone had mocked. He could still hear Lieutenant fucking Harrison's voice from 3 weeks ago. Navarro thinks he's going to poison Hitler with flower juice. Should we also send him with a slingshot? Maybe a wooden spoon? The laughter had echoed through the briefing tent. Even Major Wickham had smiled. Navarro had stood there, 5'6", 140 pounds, soaking wet, looking more like a dishwasher than a soldier, holding his grandmother's leather journal like it was scripture, because to him it was. But tonight, while good men prepared to die storming machine gun nests and mortar positions, Tomas Navarro was going to walk through the front door. The German command post sat in what had once been Villa Monterosa, a Renaissance estate requisitioned by the Wehrmacht 6 months ago when they fortified this sector of the Gothic line. General Major Steiner had chosen it personally, remote enough for security, grand enough for his ego. Intelligence reported he kept minimal staff inside. Paranoid about partisans, yes, but arrogant about his own perimeter. He believed walls and guards were enough. He didn't know about the servants. Navarro watched the patrol routes through field glasses liberated from a dead SS officer, 2 guards at the main gate, 4 roaming the courtyard in pairs, 6 more stationed at key points, 2 inside the main hall. The kitchens would be in the east wing, according to the partisan sketch. The general's private quarters, 2nd floor, southwest corner. 1 adjutant slept in the adjacent room. The general's personal orderly, a Croatian conscript named Petar, had been turned by the partisans 2 months ago. He was the key. The signal came at 9:29 p.m. A light in the kitchen window, 3 flashes. Petar was ready. Navarro moved. Tomas Navarro was born invisible. Not literally, though his mother used to joke that he was so quiet as a baby, she'd forget he was in the room. Born in 1,923 inches, Chimayo, New Mexico, a place where dust and faith mingled in equal measure, Tomas was the youngest of 6 children and the smallest of them all. His father worked the railroad. His mother took in laundry. His abuela, Celestina, was the curandera, the healer, and it was she who raised him in the ways that mattered. While his brothers learned to fight and swagger and drink, Tomas learned plants. Abuela Celestina's casita sat on the edge of their property, a small adobe structure filled with hanging herbs, clay pots, and the smell of remedies older than memory. She taught him how to identify healing plants, osha for respiratory ailments, yerba buena for digestion, manzanilla for calming nerves. But she also taught him the shadow plants, the ones you never touched without gloves, the ones that could stop a man's heart if prepared correctly. Mijo, she would say, grinding dried roots with her molcajete. Every plant is a prayer and a curse. You must know both to serve either. The other boys called him Bruja Witch, faggot, coward. He was too small for football, too quiet for fighting, too strange for friendship. He spent his teenage years in Abuela's casita, learning botanical Latin names while his brothers learned to throw punches. When Pearl Harbor was attacked, all 6 Navarro boys tried to enlist. 5 were accepted immediately. Tomas was rejected underweight, poor eyesight, and the recruitment officer took one look at him and said, "Son, we need soldiers, not secretaries." He tried again 2 months later in Santa Fe, lied about his vision test, added 5 pounds of rocks to his pockets during weigh-in. They accepted him with barely concealed skepticism. Basic training at Fort Bliss was hell. He couldn't do 20 push-ups. His rifle felt like an anchor. The drill sergeants called him Flower Boy after they found pressed plants in his footlocker. The other recruits stuffed his bunk with weeds. Once they filled his canteen with dirt and told him it was herbal medicine. Tomas endured it all in silence. But at night, he studied. While others wrote letters home or played cards, Tomas memorized the German phrases Abuela had insisted he learn. She'd seen this war coming long before the politicians. Los Alemanes, she'd said, they will need to be defeated from the inside. You are small enough to slip through cracks, smart enough to go unnoticed. He didn't understand then. He does now. The unusual weapon, his poison craft, came from a combination of Abuela's teachings and desperate innovation. During a field exercise in Texas, Tomas had gathered local plants for study. A captain saw him and mockingly suggested he brew some magic potions to defeat the Nazis. The captain was joking. Tomas wasn't. He began researching military applications of botanical toxins. Aconitine from wolfsbane could cause cardiac arrest within hours, symptoms mimicking a heart attack. Ricin from castor beans, hemlock alkaloids, belladonna compounds. He filled notebooks with dosages, preparation methods, delivery systems. He wrote letters to university botanists. He read everything he could find on medieval poisoners, Renaissance assassins, and tribal warfare tactics from 6 continents. His squad thought he'd lost his mind. "Navarro's going to poison Hitler's beer," they joked. "Hey, Flower Boy, you gonna blow poison darts at panzers?" Even the sympathetic ones like Corporal Anderson, who once stopped the worst of the hazing, thought it was a waste of time. "You're a good kid, Tomas," Anderson had said, "but this is modern war, bullets and bombs, not witch doctor shit." The mockery intensified when they shipped to Italy in June 1944. The Gothic line was a meat grinder. Men died by the hundreds in frontal assaults against fortified positions, machine gun fire, artillery barrages, minefields. The Germans held every advantage high ground, concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire. And Tomas Navarro carried vials of plant extract in his pack like some kind of medieval apothecary. The breaking point came after the disaster at Monte Battaglia. The Gothic line stretched across northern Italy like a jagged scar, German Field Marshal Kesselring's masterpiece of defensive warfare. Mountains, valleys, rivers, all transformed into killing zones. Concrete pillboxes, dragon's teeth, mines by the thousands. Every ridge a fortress, every village a strong point. The Allies had superior numbers, but numbers meant nothing against terrain and determination. For every 100 yards gained, dozens of men died. The autumn rains turned roads to mud. Supply lines stretched thin. Morale collapsed like wet paper. The German 362nd Infantry Division held the sector around Villa Monterosa, hardened veterans, many from the Eastern Front. They knew how to kill, and they knew how to wait. Their commander, General Major Klaus Steiner, was old Prussian military aristocracy, methodical, brutal, effective. He'd earned his reputation in Russia, holding Stalingrad's outer perimeter for 3 months beyond all reasonable expectation. He demanded absolute discipline from his men and absolute suffering from his enemies. Intelligence reports painted a picture of a paranoid perfectionist. Steiner personally inspected defenses daily. He executed deserters without trial. He rotated guard schedules randomly to prevent partisan infiltration. He ate separately from his staff, food prepared by his personal cook and tasted by an orderly before he touched it. He was, by all accounts, untouchable. The villa itself was a problem. 300-year-old stone construction, 3 stories, surrounded by a 10-foot wall, 2 guard posts at the main gate. roving patrols in the courtyard, machine gun positions on the roof, minefields in the approach roads. The nearest partisan cell reported that Steiner kept a garrison of 40 men within a quarter-mile radius. Any assault would alert them immediately. Traditional infiltration was suicide. Every Allied intelligence officer agreed. But Major Edward Wickham, 36th Infantry Division Intelligence, was desperate. The offensive to break through the Gothic line was scheduled for late September. Steiner's division held the critical junction point. If his command post could be eliminated, even temporarily, the entire defensive coordination would collapse. An entire sector might fold. Wickham put out a call for unconventional solutions. Tomas Navarro volunteered. The briefing room went silent when he explained his plan. "You want to poison him?" Lieutenant Harrison finally said, voice dripping with contempt. "Yes, sir." "With flowers?" "With aconitine, sir. Extracted from Aconitum napellus. Monkshood." I know what the fuck monkshood is, Private," Harrison snapped. "It's a fairy tale. You're going to sneak into a fortified German command post and, what? Sprinkle magic dust on his dinner? No, sir. I'm going to pose as a servant, infiltrate the kitchen staff through a turned orderly, and introduce a precisely measured dose of aconitine into the general's evening wine. Death will occur within 6 to 8 hours. Symptoms consistent with cardiac arrest. No evidence of foul play. By the time they suspect anything, I'll be extracted." The room exploded in laughter, all except Major Wickham. He was studying Navarro with the intensity of a man who'd run out of better options. "You're serious," Wickham said. "Yes, sir. You understand this is a suicide mission." "I understand it's the only mission that might work." "Sir?" Wickham looked at the map, at the casualty reports, at the offensive schedule, then he looked at Harrison. "How many men would we lose in a frontal assault on that command post?" Harrison hesitated. "Minimum? 60. Probably more. And we'd likely fail. And if we do nothing, the offensive stalls. We take 800 casualties taking that ridge complex." Wickham turned back to Navarro. "You have 48 hours to prove this isn't insane." Tomas worked through the night. First, he needed to synthesize pure aconitine from the dried wolfsbane roots he'd carefully collected and preserved over months. Abuela had taught him the extraction process, but she'd never prepared it for murder. This required precision. Too little, and Steiner would only get sick. Too much, and he'd die immediately, raising immediate suspicion. He worked in a supply tent behind the field hospital, using borrowed chemistry equipment and improvised tools. A surgeon named Captain Rostova, one of the few who didn't mock him, provided glassware and distilled water. She watched him work with clinical fascination. "Where did you learn this?" she asked. "My grandmother. She was a healer." "And she taught you to kill?" "She taught me that healing and killing are the same knowledge, just different intentions." The extraction took 14 hours, boiling, filtering, crystallizing. The final product was 3 small vials of clear liquid, each containing enough aconitine to stop a heart, virtually tasteless when diluted, undetectable in wine. Death would come 6 to 8 hours after ingestion, symptoms escalating from numbness to paralysis to cardiac arrest. By the time the German doctors figured out what happened, if they ever did, Tomas would be long gone. The second challenge: getting inside. The partisan contact, a woman named Sophia, who'd lost her entire family to a German reprisal, provided the key intelligence. The Croatian orderly, Petar, despised Steiner. The general had executed Petar's cousin for stealing bread. Petar wanted revenge, but he was too valuable as an inside source to risk. He would, however, help someone else get inside. The plan: Petar would report that one of the kitchen servants, a local Italian named Marco, had fallen ill. He would suggest a replacement, a quiet, subservient young man who'd worked in the monastery kitchens before the war. Someone who knew how to keep his head down and his mouth shut. That someone would be Tomas. Sophia provided the clothes, a worn servant's uniform, patched and stained, deliberately shabby. She coached him on the proper way to move, to stand, to avert his eyes in the presence of German officers. "You are furniture," she said. "You are invisible. The moment they see you as human, you're dead. Major Wickham provided the cover story and the forged work papers. The OSS had a printer in Florence who could replicate German administrative documents. Tomas became Marco Donati, age 19, from Prato, orphaned by Allied bombing, grateful for any work that came with food. But the hardest part was the mockery. Word spread through the battalion. Flower Boy's going on a secret mission. Navarro thinks he's James fucking Bond. They're sending the witch to poison Hitler's grandma. The night before infiltration, Corporal Anderson found Tomas packing his satchel. "You don't have to do this," Anderson said quietly. "Yes, I do." "Why? To prove something to them?" Tomas looked up. "I'm doing this because 60 men won't have to die taking that command post. Because 800 men won't have to storm those ridges if we can break their coordination. Because I can." Anderson nodded slowly. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both." The next evening, September 17th, Tomas Navarro walked away from the battalion aid station dressed as an Italian servant, carrying poison and a prayer. The patrol routes were predictable. Germans, for all their vaunted discipline, were creatures of habit. 9:30 patrol passed the east wall. 9:40 patrol circled to the south gate. Between 9:38 and 9:45, there was a 7-minute window where the eastern approach had only ambient observation from the rooftop machine gun nest, and they were watching the road, not the collapsed wall. Tomas descended at 9:39 p.m. He moved like fog. A skill learned not in army training but in childhood, slipping through his father's house without waking anyone, moving through Abuela's herb garden without disturbing a single wind chime. He was invisible then. He was invisible now. The ruined wall provided cover to within 80 yards of the villa's outer perimeter. Then open ground, a garden gone to seed, scattered rubble, one burned-out truck. Tomas waited until the rooftop sentry lit a cigarette. They always did, rhythmically, every 20 minutes. Then moved, during the brief flash blindness that followed. 40 yards. 20. 10. The kitchen entrance was a service door in the east wing. Petar had promised to leave it unlatched at 9:45 exactly. Tomas reached it at 9:44, pressed himself against the stone wall, counted his heartbeats. At 9:45, the door opened a crack. Tomas slipped inside. The kitchen was exactly as Sophia had described, large, stone-walled, dominated by a central preparation table and an enormous hearth. 2 cooks, older Italian women, worked in silence. A German corporal sat at a small table near the door, half asleep, rifle leaned against the wall. And Petar, the Croatian orderly, stood near the wine cabinet, looking scared but determined. Petar spoke in Italian. "You're late." Tomas responded in his carefully practiced Italian. "Marco sends his apologies. He's very ill." "You worked at the monastery?" "Yes." "Before the bombs." The German corporal stirred but didn't fully wake. Petar gestured toward a corner. "You'll prep vegetables tonight. Keep quiet. The general dines at 10:30. Tomas took his position. One of the cooks, an older woman with gray hair, looked at him with something like pity. She said nothing. For the next 40 minutes, Tomas chopped potatoes. His hands were steady. His mind was clear. He'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. At 10:15, the general's dinner preparations began. Roasted chicken, potatoes, bread, and wine, a bottle of red from the villa's pre-war cellar, selected personally by Steiner that morning. It sat on the counter, already opened to breathe. Petar would pour the wine. That was the critical moment. But first, Tomas needed to introduce the poison. The corporal stood to make his rounds. He walked through the kitchen, checked the back door, then stepped outside to smoke. 30 seconds, maybe 40. It was now or never. Tomas moved to the wine bottle. His heart hammered. The 2 cooks were focused on the chicken. Petar was arranging the general's dinner tray. Tomas pulled the first vial from his pocket, unstoppered it with trembling fingers, and poured exactly 3 drops into the wine bottle. 3 drops. Not 4, not 2, 3. He stoppered the vial, pocketed it, returned to his station. The corporal came back inside, sat down, yawned. At 10:28, Petar placed the wineglass on the general's tray, poured from the poisoned bottle, arranged the silverware with parade-ground precision, lifted the tray. Then he stopped. The adjutant, Hauptmann Vogel, had entered the kitchen. A thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually suspicious expression. He inspected the tray with bureaucratic intensity. "Pour a second glass," Vogel said in German. Petar hesitated. "Sir? The general is entertaining tonight. Field Marshal Kesselring's aide is dining with him. Pour a second glass." Tomas felt ice water flood his veins. 2 glasses, 2 men. If both drank, both would die. The Field Marshal's aide dying alongside Steiner would trigger an immediate investigation. Autopsies, toxicology. The entire plan would collapse. Petar poured the second glass. Vogel inspected both, then dismissed Petar with a wave. Tomas had seconds to decide. Time slowed to molasses. Every sound amplified. The corporal's breathing, the cook's murmured conversation, the scrape of Petar's boots on stone as he carried the tray toward the door. Tomas's mind raced through scenarios like card shuffling. Scenario 1. Do nothing. Both men drink, both die. Investigation follows. Partisan network collapses. Petar is executed. Tomas, if he escapes, accomplishes nothing. Scenario 2. Warn them. Save the aide. Expose himself. Die immediately. Scenario 3. Find a way to ensure only Steiner drinks the poisoned glass. But how? The glasses were identical. Both held the same wine from the same bottle. Both were lethal. Unless Tomas looked at the wine cabinet. At the second bottle, unopened, sitting next to where the first had been. His mind worked faster than thought. The bottles were similar but not identical. One had a slightly darker label. Vintage 1937 versus 1939. If he could swap the glasses, but Petar was already at the door. 3 seconds until he left the kitchen. 2 seconds. Tomas grabbed a handful of chopped vegetables and deliberately dropped them, scattering across the floor. The corporal swore. The cooks turned. Petar paused. "Idiot!" One cook hissed. I'm sorry." Tomas dropped to his knees, gathering vegetables with exaggerated clumsiness. The corporal stood. "Fucking Italians. Can't even hold vegetables." He walked over, looming above Tomas. "Clean it up, fast." Tomas kept his head down, kept gathering. Behind him, he heard Petar set the tray down. He couldn't navigate the door with Tomas blocking the path. "Perfect. Move, you fool." The corporal growled, nudging Tomas with his boot. Tomas shifted, still gathering vegetables, creating more chaos. The corporal bent down to help, muttering German curses. During that moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, Petar understood. He was a smart man, a desperate man, and he saw the opportunity. Petar reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, a message supposedly from the general's adjutant. "Apologies," he said to the corporal in German. "Hauptmann Vogel requests the wine be served separately. The aide has specific preferences." The corporal barely looked up. "Then pour different wines, idiot." "Yes, sir." Petar returned to the counter, opened the second bottle, poured a fresh glass from the clean wine, placed it on the tray alongside the poisoned glass, which he marked with an almost imperceptible smudge from his thumb on the base. Tomas stood. Vegetables gathered, returned to his station. The corporal sat back down. Petar carried the tray out. The door closed behind him. Tomas realized he'd been holding his breath. He exhaled slowly, quietly. The cooks returned to their work. The corporal dozed. The kitchen settled into routine. Outside that door, one glass held death. The other held wine. Everything depended on whether Petar could ensure the right man drank from the right glass. The general's private dining room was on the second floor, accessible through a guarded corridor. Petar climbed the stairs with the steady pace of a man who'd done this 100 times. His hands didn't shake. His face revealed nothing. 2 sentries flanked the dining room door. They barely glanced at him. Servants were invisible. Inside, General Major Klaus Steiner sat at a long mahogany table that had survived 3 centuries and 2 world wars. He was 56, iron-gray hair, a face carved from Prussian granite, Across from him, Oberstleutnant Franz Richter, Field Marshal Kesselring's liaison officer, younger, softer, ambitious. They were discussing the upcoming Allied offensive. The Americans will commit their reserves to the Central Valley, Richter was saying. They always do. Predictable. Frontal. Wasteful. Americans. Steiner's voice was granite scraping granite. They think war is mathematics. Resources plus violence equals victory. They don't understand that war is will, discipline, blood. Petar entered silently. Set the tray down. Served the food with mechanical precision. Then, the wine. He placed the first glass clean base in front of Richter, the second glass smudged base in front of Steiner. His hand didn't shake. Will that be all, Herr General? Petar asked in German. Yes, dismissed. Petar bowed, backed away, left the room. Behind him, he heard Steiner raise his glass. To the fatherland, Steiner said. To the fatherland, Richter echoed, the sound of glasses clinking. Then silence. Petar returned to the kitchen, gave Tomas the briefest nod. It was done. Now came the waiting. The protocol was simple. Tomas would remain in the kitchen until the end of the serving shift, then slip out through the service entrance during the guard rotation at midnight. Sophia would be waiting with partisan contacts at the extraction point, the ruined monastery. By dawn, he'd be back with Allied lines. But protocols were for operations that went according to plan. At 11:17 p.m., an alarm bell rang. The corporal bolted upright. What? The kitchen door burst open. Hauptmann Vogel, the adjutant, face white with panic. The general! Something's wrong! German erupted from Vogel's mouth, too fast for Tomas's limited vocabulary. But the tone was clear. Emergency. Medical emergency. The general had collapsed. The corporal ran. Vogel ran. The two cooks stood frozen. Petar looked at Tomas. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Upstairs, chaos erupted. Shouting, running boots, someone screaming for a doctor. Tomas calculated rapidly. The aconitine shouldn't take effect for 6 hours. It had been less than 1. Unless Steiner's heart was weaker than intelligence suggested. Unless the dose was slightly higher than intended. Unless 1,000 variables Tomas couldn't control had accelerated the poison's work. The kitchen door opened again. Not Vogel this time. A sergeant, rifle in hand. Nobody leaves, nobody moves. The general is dying, and someone poisoned him. Tomas's blood turned to ice. The sergeant pointed his rifle at Petar. You served the wine. Ah, yes, but... Shut up! You're under arrest! The sergeant grabbed Petar by the collar, shoved him toward the door. Then he looked at Tomas. You, new servant, you were in the kitchen. I only prepare vegetables. I said nobody moves. 2 more soldiers entered. They forced Tomas and the 2 cooks against the wall. Searched them roughly. Found nothing on the cooks. When they searched Tomas, they found the straight razor standard for a servant and the German phrase book. They found the empty vial in his pocket. The sergeant held it up. What's this? Medicine, Tomas said in Italian. For my stomach. The sergeant sniffed it. Showed it to the other soldier. They spoke rapid German. Then the sergeant looked at Tomas again, this time with calculation in his eyes. You're not Marco Donati, the sergeant said slowly, in thickly accented Italian. Marco Donati has a scar on his left hand. Burn scar. Everyone knows. You have no scar. Tomas said nothing. There was nothing to say. You're a spy. The sergeant smiled. The general dies, and a spy is in the kitchen. The Americans are clever. I'll give them that. He raised his rifle. This, Tomas realized with crystalline clarity, was how he died. Not in glorious combat. Not completing the mission, but against a kitchen wall, shot like a dog, because he'd forgotten one detail. One stupid detail about a fucking scar. The rifle barrel was enormous. The sergeant's finger tightened on the trigger. The window exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. The machine gun nest on the roof disappeared in a thunderous explosion. Partisan rocket, fired from the hillside. The main gate shattered under automatic weapons fire. Grenades detonated in the courtyard. The entire villa transformed into a combat zone in the span of 3 seconds. The sergeant spun toward the window. The other soldier ran for the door. Tomas didn't think he moved. He grabbed the heavy iron skillet from the hearth and swung it with every ounce of desperate strength his small frame possessed. It connected with the sergeant's temple. The man dropped like cut wheat. The second soldier turned. Tomas threw the skillet. It struck the man's face, breaking his nose. He stumbled. Tomas was already moving, grabbing the sergeant's fallen rifle. He'd barely qualified with rifles in basic training, but muscle memory took over. He raised it, fired. The recoil nearly knocked him over. The shot went wide. The soldier recovered, reaching for his own weapon. One of the cooks, the older woman, grabbed a kitchen knife and buried it in the soldier's neck. He went down, gurgling. Time became fragments. Gunfire, screaming. The corporal burst back in through the door, saw the chaos, raised his rifle. Tomas fired first. This time the shot landed. The corporal fell. "Go!" the cook shouted at Tomas in Italian. "They're killing everyone, go!" Tomas grabbed his satchel. The remaining 2 vials. Out through the kitchen door, into hell. The courtyard was carnage. Partisans had breached the perimeter, Sophia's cell, reinforced by others, all coordinating with perfect timing. They'd waited for the moment of maximum chaos inside the villa, then struck. German soldiers ran in confusion. Orders contradicted orders. The machine gun nest was gone. The gate was breached. Smoke and fire and blood. Tomas ran east, toward the wall, toward the extraction point. A German soldier appeared from smoke. Tomas shot him. The man fell. Another came. Tomas pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The soldier smiled, raised his weapon. Sophia emerged from nowhere, submachine gun stuttering. The soldier danced and fell. She grabbed Tomas. "Run, you idiot." They ran. More partisans provided covering fire. The villa was falling. The defense was collapsing. But more Wehrmacht soldiers were coming from the garrison barracks. Tomas could hear their trucks, their shouted commands, the methodical organization of men trained to respond to chaos. Tomas and Sophia reached the wall, scrambled over, tumbled down the hillside. Behind them, the villa burned. They ran through the darkness, through woods, through streams. Other partisans joined them. They split into smaller groups, double-backed, used every infiltration technique Sophia's cell had perfected over 2 years of resistance. At 2:30 a.m., they reached the ruined monastery. Allied patrols were waiting. Major Wickham stood among them, smoking a cigarette, looking like he'd aged a decade. "Navarro," Wickham said. "You're alive." "Sir." "The mission?" "Steiner is dead, sir. Or dying. I administered the poison. It worked." Wickham looked at the partisan fighters, at the smoke rising from the villa in the distance, at the small, blood-covered soldier standing before him. "It worked," Wickham repeated. "Yeah, I guess it did." General Major Klaus Steiner died at 3:47 a.m. on September 18th, 1944. Official German medical reports listed cause of death as acute cardiac failure. He was 56 years old. The autopsy, conducted by a German field surgeon with limited resources and under combat conditions, noted irregular heart rhythm, respiratory distress, and systemic failure consistent with heart attack. No poison was suspected because nobody was looking for poison. Partisans used bombs and bullets, not botanical extracts. The only complication: Oberstleutnant Franz Richter, who dined with Steiner, reported feeling ill, but recovered by morning. He complained of numbness in his extremities and nausea. The German doctors attributed it to stress and bad food. They never connected it to Steiner's death. Petar, the Croatian orderly, was executed by the SS 2 days later on suspicion of collaboration. He never confessed. He never spoke at all. The 2 kitchen cooks disappeared. Sophia's cell evacuated them before the SS could conduct interrogations. The villa fell completely on September 19th when American forces overran the position. The 362nd Infantry Division, without Steiner's coordination, fractured. The Gothic Line offensive achieved its breakthrough 3 days ahead of schedule. Final Allied casualties: 180 men, not the projected 800. Tomas Navarro returned to his unit on September 20th. The men who'd mocked him were silent now. Some looked at him with new respect. Others looked at him with fear. Lieutenant Harrison said nothing at all, just nodded when Tomas reported for duty. Major Wickham submitted Tomas for a Silver Star. The citation was classified, couldn't reveal that the U.S. Army had used a poisoner, even against enemy commanders. The medal was quietly awarded 6 months later. But the real change was internal. Command noticed. OSS noticed. The quiet soldier with the botanical knowledge became a weapon they wanted to understand. They offered him specialized training, advanced infiltration techniques, chemical and biological warfare doctrine. He refused all of it. "I'm not an assassin," he told Wickham. "I did what needed to be done. Once. That's enough." Wickham studied him. "You know you saved hundreds of lives. I know I killed a man with knowledge my grandmother gave me to heal people. I know that I'll carry that until I die. Regret? No, sir. Just truth." The war ended. Tomas Navarro returned to New Mexico. He married a schoolteacher named Rosa. They had 3 children. He never spoke about the villa, about Steiner, about the poison. His children knew he'd served in Italy. They knew he had a medal in a box in the attic. That was all. He worked as a pharmacist in Albuquerque for 40 years. He grew a garden. He taught his grandchildren about plants, but only the healing ones. The shadow knowledge died with him in 2003, but the legend lived. In military intelligence communities, the story circulated in whispers. The servant who poisoned a German general. The impossible infiltration. The botanical assassin. Details were embellished. Facts became mythology. Some versions claimed he poisoned 50 Germans. Some claimed he was trained by indigenous shamans. Some claimed the poison was so perfect it left no trace at all. The truth was simpler and more remarkable. A small man, mocked and dismissed, used knowledge everyone considered obsolete to accomplish what conventional warfare couldn't. Years later, a military historian researching unconventional warfare in World War II tracked down Tomas Navarro. He was 76, retired, tending his garden in the late afternoon sun. The historian asked him about the mission. Tomas was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "People think war is about weapons, rifles, tanks, bombs. They're wrong. War is about will and knowledge. The Germans had better weapons than us in Italy, better positions, better training. But we had knowledge they didn't respect. I had knowledge they didn't see coming. My grandmother taught me that every plant has power. Healing or killing, it's the same knowledge, different intention. The U.S. Army taught me to shoot a rifle, but shooting rifles is what they expected, what they prepared for, what they countered. I walked through their front door because I was invisible. Small, weak, harmless. They saw a servant and never saw a soldier. That was my weapon, not the poison, but the blindness they had to who I was and what I could do. People called me Flower Boy. They laughed, they mocked, and then I did what they said was impossible, using methods they said were obsolete, because I understood something they didn't. The oldest weapons are often the most effective because everyone's forgotten to defend against them." The historian asked one final question. "Do you regret it?" Tomas looked at his garden, at the healing herbs growing in careful rows, at the poisonous plants he never cultivated. "I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. Steiner would have killed hundreds more if he'd lived. My choice saved lives. That's not comfortable, but it's true. War makes us into things we weren't meant to be. I became a poisoner. I lived with it. But I never became the thing they wanted me to be after a weapon to be used again and again. I was a soldier when it mattered. Then I came home and became a healer. The knowledge can do both. I chose which. The villa still stands, partially rebuilt, now a museum. Tourists walk through rooms where General Major Steiner once planned operations. They see displays about partisan resistance, Allied advances, the Gothic Line campaign. They don't know that on September 17th, 1944, a 5'6" soldier from New Mexico walked through those doors carrying 3 vials of poison and rewrote the tactics manual for modern warfare. They don't know that the most devastating infiltration of World War II was conducted not by special forces or elite commandos, but by a man everyone underestimated, using methods everyone mocked. History remembers the big battles, the D-Day landings, the Battle of the Bulge, Berlin falling. It forgets the small moments, the quiet soldier, the impossible mission, the poison that stopped a general's heart and saved hundreds of lives. But in military intelligence schools, they still teach a case study. They don't use Navarro's name, still classified in some files. They call it Operation Nightshade. And they end the lesson with this: the enemy always prepares for the weapons they respect. The wise warrior uses the weapons they've forgotten to fear. In Tomás Navarro's estate, found after his death in 2003, was a small leather journal, his grandmother's journal, the one he'd carried to war. Inside, pressed between pages of handwritten Spanish and botanical illustrations, were 2 dried flowers, Aconitum napellus, monkshood, wolfsbane, beautiful purple blooms, perfectly preserved. A note in Tomás's handwriting dated 1945. Abuela was right. Every plant is a prayer and a curse. These are both. The journal was donated to the National Museum of the United States Army. It sits in climate-controlled storage now, a mundane artifact among thousands. Curators catalog it as personal effects, World War II soldier, pharmaceutical training. They have no idea what those flowers did. They have no idea that ancient knowledge, dismissed and mocked, proved more lethal than modern weapons when wielded by a man desperate enough to be invisible. Tomás Navarro died quietly, in his sleep, surrounded by family. His obituary listed him as U.S. Army veteran, decorated for service in Italy, beloved pharmacist and grandfather. No one ever mocked him again. His legend, whispered in classified briefings and special operations training centers, became something else. Proof that the most dangerous warriors are not always the strongest, but the smartest, not the loudest, but the quietest. Not the ones with the newest weapons, but the ones with the oldest knowledge. And somewhere in the mountains of New Mexico, purple flowers still grow wild, beautiful, and deadly, waiting for someone who remembers what they can do.